All right. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Patrick Roberts. I serve as Associate Director for Marketing Technology for ECU Career Services. And today I'll be serving as today's moderator for our panel. First, let me welcome everyone to our series that we're calling Career Expert Panels, featuring successful alumni sharing their knowledge and advice with fellow ECU Pirates. Today's topic is how to define your online brand, where we're going to be discussing tips and tricks for alumni in terms of developing an online brand, as well as we have some successful alumni sharing their stories about what they've done to successfully build their online brand. Before we get started, I do want to mention and take a moment to emphasize during the time of COVID-19, of course, most of us are familiar with working from home, and we just want to take a moment to express that hopefully everyone is safe and healthy, and that we do hope that this series does develop some sense of community among our pirate nation, and that we can springboard this connection to further connections in person when we are able to meet on campus for events. So again, we do want to emphasize, hopefully everyone is staying healthy and safe. And I think most importantly, especially for those that are teleworking, that you have some sense of sanity and that these can help contribute to that. Our goal, again, with these sessions is to develop that sense of community. So as we're discussing and we have set questions for our panelists, but if you do have a question, we do hope that you do type that in the chat. We do have Mary from Alumni Association monitoring the chat. So if a question comes up, we'll stop and we'll ask the panelists their thoughts on that question. We hope to get to everybody's questions today, but if we don't, feel free to email us. Another thing that we want to emphasize before we get started is that today's session is being recorded and will be posted to the Alumni Association page. So in the future, if you know of a fellow alumni that would benefit from watching the session today, please make sure that you share this with them. And we're going to be sharing this link out to all the registered attendees as well. So to get started, now that we have all the housekeeping items out of the way, how about we start with you, Brandon, and if you'll take a moment to introduce yourself, including your name, employer, title, and graduation from ECU, as well as your major. We'd love to hear from you, and then we'll go right down the list.
Sure. Thank you, Patrick. Hello, Pirate Nation. Hope everyone's doing well out there. My name is Brandon Ives. I am with Brasco, a CEO of Brasco, and Brasco is a creative branding and digital marketing agency based in downtown Raleigh. I'm a graduate 03 and was a graduate of the School of Communications, and started my career in, I thought I was going to go down the path of working in journalism, broadcast journalism, working in news, but shifted more into communications and marketing as a career path. So happy to be here. Glad to see everyone.
Great, thanks. Carl, Natasha, either of you can go next.
All right.
Go ahead, Natasha.
Okay, I'll go. I'm Natasha Cherney. I work for the United States Air Force. I am a public affairs officer, which is pretty much the public relations arm of the military. I've been in for about 12 years. I graduated in 2008 and I was a communications major, and I'm really excited to be here. Love ECU. It's been a huge part of networking for me. There's been a lot of great officers and that I know in the military that has come out of ECU.
And this is, hello everybody, this is Carl Risden. I'm a consultant out of Atlanta in the digital transformation space. Held many roles in sales leadership around IoT, software, and digital transformation most of my career. Graduated from ECU in '91. With a business degree and a minor in French language, which I get to use a lot in the United States. And, you know, truly enjoy being part of the ECU Nation, and glad to be here today to share some thoughts with everybody.
Great, thank you for those introductions. So to start with, I think, you know, just to lay a foundation down for everybody on the call, why don't we start with, how did you develop what did you see as, or how did you develop your online brand? And anyone can jump in.
Sure. Sure, I can start a little bit there. I think first it's important that we define what brand is.
Mm-hmm.
you could probably ask 10 different people what branding is and what brand is, and you may get 10 different answers. I've heard people say branding is PR. I've heard people say branding is, a logo, or branding is, messaging, or it's social media, or, it really does touch all aspects of marketing and communications. And ultimately branding is the core foundation for who you are and what it is that you want to say and how you want to communicate that. I think personal branding, online branding is not that much different from branding a company in terms of how you would go about that process of developing your brand. For me personally, so it's hard to self-evaluate what the perception of your own personal brand is. That's difficult because you're not the one perceiving it, others are perceiving you. So that can be difficult, but I think at least personally, I've tried to develop a brand around, for myself at least, around my expertise in marketing, creative marketing, and business development and growth. So that's really an area that I feel like I'm strong at. And so really my brand has been more around developing that. Another point that I think is important to kind of keep in mind is personal branding. I think it has to be a blend of who you are, you're personally, blended with where you are in the community or where you are in the business world. And that can be difficult sometimes, blending those two things together. And then lastly, I think it's more about thinking about where you want to go and how you want to evolve personally. So whereas, for the last 10, 15 years, I've been working towards, me personally, just building a brand around what I think my expertise is. That may not be the case 10 to 15 years down the road, because I may be changing where I want to go. I may be changing my own kind of direction. And so I think although you're building a brand is not always constant. It's always evolving and changing based off of kind of where you want to go. And that's the case for a business or for personal branding.
Yeah,
Really good.
I think to dovetail a bit on what Brandon's mentioned too, you have control over what you put out there. You don't have control over how people perceive it as much. So you've got to focus on what you really have control over, and that consists of things that you put out digitally, whether it's on your LinkedIn page or in other social media. It's also things that articles and such that you might participate in, so that you might be quoted in a press release or anything along those lines, or quoted in a thought leadership piece. You have the control over those things, and those can serve as how you direct your global brand or your personal brand. Another key thing that I would emphasize is making sure that whatever you are doing, that it's genuine. So, you can't have a digital version of you and then the real you. That's not gonna, in the world we live in today, that's gonna become pretty obvious pretty quickly. So, don't assume that you can do that. A lot of us are fortunate that we didn't grow up in an age where, everything was captured digitally, because, as you grow up, that can come back to bite you, especially, in your college years. I saw some younger people on the registration list. And so, I look at what my kids do, and fortunately I've always been very aware, and they have as well, as what you accumulate, can come back to haunt you. I don't know who it was, but I saw an actor this morning that I'd never heard of that had been fired because of something they tweeted many, many years ago, so you get this, we're constantly reminded of these facts. So be aware of what you're posting on any social media, and control that to make sure that it's genuine, but it's also reflective of what you'd want people to see. And that will really help you manage your digital brand. And that's really gonna be critical, especially in this day and age.
Natasha, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just jump in and just talk about what I think my personal brand is based off of the feedback that I receive. So that's kind of how I judge it. as the gentleman mentioned, they say what the content that you push out on social media. But for me, I know that I have a lot of military women that when they have children, the first question is, should I get out? Can I still be in the military and still be a mom? Well, I have 3 boys and I'm a major and I've been in for 12 years. So based off of that, I know that people see me as a leader in the military and a mother. I get a lot of, when I'm in public relations for the military, often we don't push out a lot of content ourselves. You know, we're very aligned with whatever our brand is. And currently I'm stationed at Minot Air Force Base, and Minot Air Force Base is the brand that I support, that I help build. And that presents some challenges. So we're closely aligned with our work and our personal level, our personal lives. So there isn't a whole lot of separation for what we do in the military and then what we do personally. A few years ago, I decided that I wanted to empower women and I wanted to share their story. So I started a podcast. So when I did that, when I stepped out of the norm of what it is to be a public affairs officer in the military, that also became part of my brand. So I often get a lot of women that also want to start their own podcast, and they reach out, kind of like a little bit of consulting, like, how do I do this? How did you do this? How did you do this in the military? So I do get 1 or 2 men that I have helped support with their podcast, but really it's the women. They come to me and they feel like I'm a safe place. So that's kind of how I know what my brand is. I'll give you another, just a short, quick one. I kind of threw myself into purchasing a travel trailer, and we lived in it for a few times every assignment. And so people often come to me and ask me about that. So I think I have a very family brand, empowerment of women and leadership. And I get that by the feedback that I receive and the interactions that I receive.
So Natasha, what's the name of your podcast? This is an opportunity to plug it.
Brodet Nation. It's been a couple years. I did 2 seasons and I'm working on the 3rd season right now.
Great. So to go along with that, I think the next question we have here, and this can go in several different directions, so feel free to talk about it in terms of personal branding or for company branding as well. But what are some of the steps that you might take to build an online brand? One that I noted that Brandon talked about right away, and I think that's important for all of us to take away, is having a clear goal in mind when you start building your brand. I equate it to how we work with students with resume writing. It's the same idea, right? Of where you're trying to get to and how can you get there. So again, any of you can jump in with your thoughts on that, but what are the steps that you would recommend our alumni take when they're building a brand?
Well, this is Carl. I'll jump in again, I guess. And I think that the point made about knowing where you want to go is an excellent lead into that. Understanding, what you're trying to achieve with your brand, whether it's a career in a certain area, which is probably most people's ambition, where they want to take their career, what area of focus they have in mind, and then, investing time and resources in that. I'm especially impressed with the amount of hard work that would go into a podcast. I know that's not easy. So, that to me is like an extra level of effort that would require a lot of hard work and a lot of practice as well. But being able to have some direction and being able to then map out a path, just like a marketing plan, and saying, here's the things we want to achieve, and then or I want to personally achieve, and then trying to find ways to accomplish that. I do find that, coming up with thought pieces and finding ways to get those out there. And, it's also good to collaborate with that, with others on that as well, so that you have, you're collecting momentum and you're collecting ideas along the way, would be some strong recommendations.
And I can jump in as well. I really, where you want to go and where you want to be, because it does change. I think another part that, especially from a business standpoint, from working in the military, the internal culture and really having an honest assessment of what your current brand is. So Minot Air Force Base is in North Dakota. And if you've never been to North Dakota, there's not a whole lot going on. So for our base, and there's been a lot of, there's been issues in the past with Minot Air Force Base, especially back before I came in. This base has sent off nukes to another base, and that was a huge perception that this place is awful, that it gets super cold here. So when I came into this seat, it was, okay, what is our current perception and what is our current brand? And really focusing, like, we don't have to change the perception of Minot. There is a lot of difficulties here. It is a very difficult mission, but maybe we challenge it. And so really we started internally looking at what the honest perception is, what the feedback we were getting. And then everything that we did, we updated our logo and we pressed on every internal, external document. We started pushing that logo out. And that really started helping the brand itself. But just, I think having that honesty, and often we look outside of like, hey, this is how we're going to brand. But if you start internally and changing the culture of your team and focus on that leadership, it'll help externally.
Yeah, you make some really good points, Natasha, and you have a really awesome perspective as well, which I really appreciate. The fact that you talked about feedback, that's really hard to kind of get. Sometimes I had a friend of mine who went through a leadership training course, and one of the things that he had to do was solicit feedback from other friends or other business colleagues. And so I was sent a survey, and I had to actually take a survey and give my evaluation on him. And I'm sure, like, putting myself in his shoes, like reading some of that feedback, it's probably not easy because some of it's good, positive, but they said be very transparent about what you think about this person in these certain areas. And so, getting feedback is not easy, but it is very important. I think in terms of the steps to develop a brand, following kind of the traditional way that you would look at it, there's sort of three areas. One is discovery, which is asking the right questions, setting goals, making sure that you understand what it is that you're trying to achieve. The second piece is developing messaging. What is your pitch? What is your bio? What is it that you're trying to say? How are you going to communicate your message? And then having sort of a core message and maybe like an elevator pitch, something that's kind of quick and easy to kind of get out there to kind of pique interest in what it is that you're doing. And then I think the third piece is the visual identity, which with a company starts with a logo and then it builds off into other collateral or website. But with a personal brand, it's a little bit different, right? It's about your style, or it's about the tone that you're trying to set, or it's about imagery that you might use, or in the content that you create, things that you write, videos that you put out there. What type of what are you putting out there? That's all shaping a visual identity for you. Personally, when you're putting that out there. But yeah, that's the basic, I think, steps there is, discovery, messaging, and then coming up with a plan for content and sort of visual.
That's great. So going back to messaging, I know this wasn't a question on the list, but there's a list of questions here we're going to get to here in a second. But going back to messaging as part of your step 2 there, one of the things I researched when we were talking about branding and online branding was coming up with a brand statement. For the 3 panelists, could you indicate what you might see or seek in a brand statement? Just some elements that really stick out to you, specifically maybe for a personal brand or for an organization brand?
I mean, I would recommend 2 different pieces to that. One being more of a bio, that I would equate the bio being similar to a company's core brand message. Typically, a core brand message is different from what we call a pop message or a pitch message. A core message is more stating the facts of who you are, what it is that you do, and being very clear about it. We're not trying to get too creative or too crazy with that. We're just trying to really just list out who we are. Then you would have a pitch message or an elevator pitch, and that might be something short, usually maybe 3 parts to that. One being something like an opening statement that's going to pique someone's interest, maybe a line or two that talks about just very clearly, directly what impact you're going to make. And then a third element to an elevator pitch would be some sort of action, not like actionable step, where it's something that's going to be engaging. Like, what's the next step? This is who I am. Okay, you can connect with me here. You can watch a video here. You can check out my company here. There's some sort of actionable step with your elevator pitch that I think is important.
That's great. Others' thoughts on that?
I can jump in. Here we like to talk about the unique value proposition. So, you know, what sets you apart? What can people get from your brand that they can't get from other people? And that's something that I know we focus on a lot. We have a lot of commanders because they see everybody on social media, just like a lot of CEOs, like, oh, I need to be on social media. I need, let's say, a Facebook page. A lot of times people don't understand how much work it takes to actually build that online profile, to build those social media accounts. And one of the first things that we talk through is, you know, how are you unique? What are you bringing to the table? And what are people going to get from your account specifically that's going to attract them?
That's great. Any other thoughts, Carl?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're, you know, and keeping in mind, we're kind of mixing, you know, company branding and personal branding because they are very similar. And so you want to really kind of take the same approach to both. And, you know, one of the discovery things that I find particularly helpful is just trying to write your own bio. And you're really, you know, thinking hard about what you're trying to say to others is, you know, quite simply a good discovery process. And then your end result will be something that you can work with. And then you want to figure out, how do you tailor that to be unique, and how do you tailor that to you know, to set yourself apart from others? Because that's part of your goal here, is to, you know, establish yourself as having some unique value. So, you know, using that as part of your discovery process internally, I think can be very valuable.
That's great. So as I said, there are some questions that came up in the chat. So one question from Spencer, well, there's 2 parts here, but the first part we'll ask first is, how do you find or discover mentors? So let's start with that question first.
Number one, I think that's a great question.
Sure.
I think you can find mentors in a lot of places too. So a mentor is not just, you know, somebody with more experience than you. It can also be, you know, a friend who you really look to that's successful and has a lot of good ideas. And so you can find multiple types of mentors. You know, it could be somebody you've known your whole life that just seems to really have some, you know, some good ideas. So use that and you know, learn from them. You certainly want to seek out mentors in your companies, you know, so, you know, it's a good idea as you are trying to establish yourself within an organization to reach out to somebody at a senior level who you've clicked with and say, listen, I'm trying to find a mentor in this organization. Would you work with me? That's going to have a lot of advantages. Number one, in the company that you're in, now all of a sudden you've got somebody who's also an advocate for you, and they're gonna see over the horizon and be able to identify opportunities that you might not otherwise see. And of course, they're going to give you ideas that that are going to help you along the way, you know, in your everyday life. And a lot of these things too apply in your career as well as your personal life. You know, you may be overly involved in your career and you need to focus on other aspects of your life and things like that. So, you know, using a variety of types of people and relationships as mentors is a recommendation that I would put out there.
Yeah, that is a good question. And that finding a mentor has been something that I've struggled with over my career, mainly because I think part of it's a me thing, because I think to find a good mentor, you have to be willing to put yourself out there and reach out and engage someone and ask them, will they work with you and help you? Sometimes you're in if you start working at a large company, or if you're in the military, for example, I think I've talked to friends who are in the military, there's structure there that is in place to allow you to find a mentor and connect with someone. And sometimes you're forced to do that, to connect with someone. I think me personally, part of my challenge, I've had a challenge of really finding that over the years, just mainly, I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm kind of just out there, and it's been on me I think it's been more on me personally to actually put myself out there to find that person. And I have developed that over the years with a couple of folks, but it hasn't been something that has been easy for me.
Yeah, I would say oftentimes we know who we would like to mentor us, but it doesn't normally work out that way. It is definitely a relationship that has to be built between the mentor and the mentee. And I know it's in the military, we do have a lot of things in place where, you try to mentor someone, we find a wingman, but sometimes it's organically built, and it isn't somebody that you would expect to be your mentor. One of the things that I did here, and I came to Minot, was I wanted to get involved with our local businesses, and I ended up volunteering for a nonprofit. And as soon as I got into that nonprofit and I'm on the board, I'm like, man, these are my people. They're just like me. And then from there, I started realizing that everybody has their own strengths and networking. And then that's how it is built. I think it's a 50-50 relationship, and a good mentorship and mentee relationship is a give and take, that somebody's willing to give you their time, because that's the one thing that is limited and the one thing that we don't have a lot to offer. And if you find someone that's willing to give you that time, they don't necessarily have to, what we would say, outrank you or be a CEO. Sometimes it's that beneficial relationship. You can be in the same level and still get that mentorship based off of experience. So I wouldn't necessarily look at a mentorship as someone that's either older than you or have more experience. Really focus on that relationship and what you can pull from it, and also what you can give.
That's great. And I think this goes back to your point, Natasha, at the beginning about seeking out feedback for your perception. That's something that I think a mentor could serve as well. And the second part to Spencer's question was, before we move on, actually, I do want to emphasize, Mary did share in the chat a resource for all alumni that aren't familiar called ECU Connect at ecuconnect.com. For those that are looking for mentorship or other alumni that are willing to help, definitely check out that resource. Again, that's in the chat. But Spencer's second question here is, how do you determine if the foundation that you built, let's say you have a following on social media and other places, is strong enough to leap into building your own business? So for anybody on the call that feels like they can support or comment on that.
So I think it depends on the type of business that you're looking to build, but it's more than just having a following on social, though. A lot of it also has to do with relationships that you're building online and offline. So using social and using online channels to connect and stay connected with them, but building off of that with actual relationships and actually engaging with people offline, I think definitely contributes to helping you build a business off of your, online following, if you will. But I don't think you can solely rely on that unless you're, again, it depends on the type of business. If you're an e-commerce company and you're, solely online with your company, you may be able to, sort of take a following that you've built and transition that into a business. That's possible. If you're a consultant or you're in a professional services or agency setting like what I am, I think it's more about relationships, building trust, being authentic. Our tagline at Brasco is "Be authentic," and I think that's really the core. It's about being authentic to who you are and what you're trying to say and what you're trying to do. That's really important. So that's what I would say. Depends on the business and how you might be able to sort of leverage your online following to make that work for a business.
That's great. Any other thoughts on that before we move on? I know that you're probably the most versed in this, Brandon, since you are an entrepreneur and started your own business as well. So appreciate your feedback on that. So this kind of leads into the next question, and you might start off, Brandon, with this, but are there any specific websites or tools that you use to create your online brand?
Yeah, so there are a few. I think it depends on what you're trying to do, but if you're talking about reputation or brand building, I mean, really the first thing is to go ahead and create profiles on as many social media platforms as possible. In my opinion, what part of the battle here, part of the game is owning your name in search.
Mm.
That's part of it, okay? And so what that means is we need to have profiles of, on social platforms. We need to have blog platforms. We need to go on, GoDaddy and buy our name and buy the URL of our name, for example. That is probably a smart idea. Spin up a little website, a little microsite, whether it's through, there's plenty of tools that you could do that. Doesn't have to be anything extravagant, but try to own as much real estate, online real estate, as possible for your name. That's part of the game. That's part of the game, in my opinion. The other piece of it is actually saying something meaningful, having something to say that people care about. And that goes into a content plan. That goes into actually having a plan for what you want to say. And so websites that you might use, obviously any of the social media platforms, I would go ahead and put your name into Google Alerts. Just to make sure you get any kind of notices when something comes up on your name. That might help you keep tabs on it. There are other tools that will help you monitor, like BuzzSumo is a site that you can use to help monitor some of that information. There's a site that I've really enjoyed using called brandyourself.com. They have evolved their business model some over the years. It used to be a free tool, and now I believe it's a paid tool. So you may want to check that out. Yeah, I mean, other than that, it just depends on what you're trying to do. But I think the biggest thing is just have something to say and make sure that you have, your profile set up correctly everywhere. And that's really the starting point.
Those are some helpful resources. Thank you. Carl or Natasha, anything else you want to add there?
I think those are, great suggestions. I think most people are interested in, in promoting their personal brand for, career purposes. And, I find, LinkedIn is obviously one of the most used platforms out there, and it ends up being sort of the global job board in many ways as well. So I would place a particular emphasis on making sure you really focus on making that as polished as you can. And then, looking at these other things as sort of, as making that more stable for yourself as well. So, if you don't have the resources or don't want to invest the time to do a complete, profile across the web, make sure you have that dialed in would be, kind of my top priority, I think.
Mm-hmm.
For me, since the guys covered it beautifully, I would just say becoming the expert in whatever you want your brand to be. And part of the way that you do that is being involved in that community per se. So for public affairs, we talk a lot about information operations, and that's just like the information environment. And that can be anything from social media to whatever's going on in the cyber world, right? So one of the ways that I'm kind of dipping my toe is I'm involved in a discussion group where, it's all volunteer. And if we want to get something changed at a higher level, I start being more vocal and start reading more on that particular subject. So what I can add to this is becoming that expert. You may not know a whole lot about it at first. Podcasting, I had no idea. And I have stepped away from it for a little while, but you'd be surprised how quickly you end up becoming the expert and just learning more about that craft or whatever it is that you want to be your brand. So think through that there is value in like the Facebook groups, the meetups and that networking. And again, it all comes back to that relationship building and that interaction with others, become that expert.
Yeah, podcasting takes commitment,
Mhm.
right? I mean, really,
It
really,
does.
really content creation in general is
Mm.
very time consuming, and it takes commitment. And you'll hear people say, oh, you should be generating, 20, 30 pieces of content a day. That's a full-time job, so you have to think, what can you actually do? What is realistic and practical that you can do to make a difference and actually make an impact into creating that perception and that brand that you want to create. But I definitely give you some praise for committing to the podcast, and or anyone out there who's writing regularly. Medium is a great place to go and get yourself published, but it just takes a lot of time and commitment.
I would like to add on to that a little bit too. I think one thing that would be beneficial if you're interested in writing or podcasting would be to seek out training in that area, because I know personally I'm not a great writer, and I have people I worked with that have done the podcast, and I know the level of effort that goes into it, and the ones that succeeded did a lot of training to get to kind of help them get started. And I don't know, Natasha, if you maybe could describe a little bit more if you did that, but I would say that would be very helpful in helping you then organize the content that you may have that you can contribute, but do it in a really good way.
Yeah, I think I reached out to people that I knew had podcasts. I think the first time I listened to it, and I was in a different place in my life, and that's something that I'll add is you have different seasons for things, but really successful podcasts, they are on it on social media. They have their content and their generation. And as far as training for me, I went to YouTube. I asked people that were involved in podcasting, and I listened to a lot of different podcasts. And I was like, okay, that's something that I want to build in mine. And for a couple of years, I stepped away from it because job commitments change. And I do like what your brand is now may change 10 to 15 years from now. And I'm trying to get right back into the podcasting because it does take a time commitment. Had another baby, moved to another job. So it is different. But keep in mind that I think the best part about an online brand is it's yours. There's a lot of different ways to get to building your online brand, and you have to figure out what works for you and understand that your life is going to be in different seasons. And you have to be okay with when one season ends and another one begins. So recognizing that, and there are going to be transition periods. I hope that helps, and I hope I answered the question. I didn't do a whole lot of I just kind of jumped in because that's, to my husband's dismay, who I am. But a lot of YouTube, a lot of reading, a lot of research, then a lot of listening.
That's helpful. Related to this question, because we have 3 successful alumni that probably have learned some lessons from their experience, is there any specific tools that you'd recommend people avoid when, example would be, do you need to learn all the TikTok dances before you jump in, or any suggestions that you guys might have related to that?
We're all looking at each other.
I can say I love watching TikTok videos, but I have not jumped into that.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. I think you can do what you can do. I'll give you an example. For podcasting, they're like, well, there's a lot of different thought processes. I do my podcast in seasons because I do what works best for me. And I love what Brandon said about being authentic. You can't, just because everybody's doing it doesn't mean that you have to do it. And sometimes I like owning the real estate. I think that's great. But we all have our personal lives as well. And if you're trying to do everything, if you're trying to be on every social media platform, then you're probably not giving your best in branding. It just depends on what your time commitment is, whether that's how much time are you going to put into Instagram, how much time are you going to put into Twitter, how much time you're going to put into Facebook. So what Brandon said about being authentic is so true. Like, I can't just up and start a TikTok like I know what I'm doing on there. It wouldn't be authentic. It'd probably be awful. But if I get passionate and I know what my niche is going to be, then maybe I can throw myself into that. I don't know if that helps or if that answers that question. But
I think all
helps,
TikTok
yeah.
is off. Isn't all TikTok off?
yeah,
That's what I was going to say, but yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. It has its place. I think it does have its place like every other social platform. I think the most interesting thing to me is that every social platform has its own personality too, and needs its own tone of type of content. If you're trying to build yourself up as an expert and you have more of a professional, serious tone, is TikTok where you want to be? Is that really the platform where you want to be for that? Maybe not. I think you have to really evaluate kind of where you need to put your resources and time, essentially.
That's great.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I would also say, you have these different platforms, and if you're, that since they're available widely publicly, you also need to realize that that people are going to look at them that are in your professional sphere. So it's a great way to try to understand who somebody is when you're looking at them professionally. So if your profile is discoverable and you've done a good job making sure it's your name and your content, then be prepared to live with it too. So you will be judged by that in your professional world.
That's great. So we've had a few questions come up in the chat here. The first one, and this could probably be and probably will be its own whole session, based on if you're conducting a job search, how do you stand out? So again, focusing on today's topic of branding, what are some suggestions that you guys have related to standing out, especially in today's climate with COVID-19?
That's a whole other discussion.
Yes.
But just kind of staying on the online side of this a bit, recognize that you have talent screening software that's using things like keywords, much in the way Google works, to sort through resumes. And this is one of the toughest times to be looking for a job. I've got a daughter that graduated last year from Clemson and has been working overseas. Now has come back and working on her first real career. And it's staggering the number of resumes you're having to send out if you're a new graduate. And so, you've got to tailor your applications more so than you used to in the past to make sure that you can even make it through that screening software. And so that's one recommendation that I would give. The other would be to really focus in on who's trying to do the hiring and try to find out a way to contact them directly, because again, you are one in hundreds in many cases. And so how are you going to, make your way to the top? And the game is still very much relationships. It's very rare that people get hired out of the blue. It's a connection from somewhere. So all the other things we talked about networking, that's really what we're really talking about in many ways. And so, flex your network, reach out to people that reach out to friends, reach out to family, really, really think about how you're connected to the place you're trying to work or the career you're trying to go after, and flex it. Try to leverage that in obviously positive ways, but that's my advice.
Others?
I've been seeing a lot of really good online portfolios on basically taking your resume and creating a mini microsite. See that more for designers, because we actually hire designers and graphic designers, web designers at Brasco, and but I'm seeing that more for everyone. Taking your experience and your resume and visualizing it a little bit more can help stand out. I think the other thing is during this time, is getting more education and getting certified in things. So, you know, is there an online class that you could take that might get you certified, you know, or getting a certificate in this, you know, whatever it is that you're going after, those little things make a difference. And so I would definitely encourage people to look for those ways to kind of get an edge through additional training.
Yeah. Anything you want to add, Natasha?
It's a little bit hard since I'm kind of in the military. I will say I do have to look at resumes when we hire civilians, and it all comes down to that training, because you really don't know who you're going to get. It comes down to training, and then the first thing that we do is we look at that person's social media presence. You know, we do our own background checks. So again, it comes back to online branding. It comes back to, like Carl said, like, what are you pushing out there and how do you want people to take you? So that's the only thing I can add is I agree with Brandon 100%. Take advantage of the time to do training. Because I think even if it's YouTube, even if it's Coursera's, you're taking the time to educate yourself. And that shows a lot that would show a lot to me as someone that has to look at resumes for a position that we're trying to fill.
That's great. So we've had 3 other questions come through the pool. And again, most of these could be their own sessions. And one of them actually is about career changing. And so since we have some experts that are in the communications, public relations realm industry, the question really is about it's more of they're thinking about career changing to this field. And I'm going to revamp their question a little bit to, what do you seek in your field as some skills or some transferable skills that you might seek? Let's say, because they're in clinical research, but they're seeing it as it could relate to data-driven branding, marketing. So again, I'm going to tweak that question to be more of, hey, what are some transferable skills that you might see in your field?
Well, speaking from my end, our field is over the years, I think marketing, advertising, public relations, design, it's all sort of started to kind of come together a little bit more. You used to see agencies, or used to see these disciplines, if you will, a little more separated. But for this person, I think coming from that space, I mean, that's a growing industry that they're in right now. So they would bring a lot of value just from having experience from that industry. So maybe going after jobs that may either be in that industry and they're sort of transitioning into the clinical space, into a marketing position within that industry, or if they're looking to go to, for example, an agency, maybe going to an agency that works in healthcare or an agency that does a lot of work in that area, they could come with that experience. Starting out, I would say looking at ways to take your skills from another industry, roll those over into things that might be a sort of a nice, smooth transition, entry level, whether it's a project management skills. You know, there are certain things that just transition. It really doesn't matter what industry you're in. I'm really good with, you know, managing projects, managing time, being organized. Those things are transferable, right? I mean, so I think really trying to figure out what those things are so that you can leverage those as best as you can and really promote those for the type of role that you're going after. If you are a project manager in clinical research and you're trying to become a graphic designer, that's a pretty big shift. So you're going to have to really come with a lot of good background on that. But I think maybe your goal is to be a graphic designer, but maybe you come in as a project manager because you already have those skills, and then you can develop into a graphic designer. So those types of things, I mean, I would be thinking about those things.
Yeah, I think you kind of have to, it depends on what your specialty is, really. So like the example of project management, that's highly transferable. Whereas another, you're not going to take a nursing degree into, some kind of tech startup unless they're focused on nursing solutions that apply to the healthcare industry or something along those lines. So it's something that you have to figure out, what's that relationship, what's the bridge that I'm really going to focus on here. And if you're truly trying to make a wholesale career change, you may have to almost start over, and come in at a more a junior level to build yourself up. But make sure you can see the path that you're trying to take, so that this makes sense. So you're not disappointed later. But if you can map out a path and it makes sense, then go for it. But it's a challenging thing to do, but it's definitely doable.
Patrick, I think we have a great piece of content for ECU Alumni Association to create. Create this graphic that shows all of the key verticals and types of industries, and what are those transferable skill sets that could go from industry to industry. For example, if you're a teacher, if you're able to manage a classroom of 30 kids, pretty sure you can manage a team, right? Or if you're a nurse, you're dealing with all types of different types of people. Those customer service, client services skills translate over. Maybe something like that would be helpful for people.
Yeah, that's great. And Mary did plug into the chat that we're actually having a whole nother webinar just on career changing coming up. So again, the topic is definitely one that you could spend a whole hour in discussion on. So related to that, I want to make sure people don't think that we're ignoring their questions. One of them was about volunteering as a way to gain experience. I'm just going to jump in and say, yes, we recommend that, especially in a time like this. And that, again, going back to their responses just now about transferable skills, I would say that this is an example of a way to get those. And then someone mentioned it earlier about what are you doing now during COVID? And I think volunteering as well as doing some online training. We've had employers on these panels as well as others that I've sat on where they are looking for what are you doing during this time and how are you going to communicate that to employers as you're job seeking. So I do want to switch gears back to what the conversation's about today, though, as we get close to the end of the session. And I think one really good way to end the conversation is because we have some experts on branding as well as public affair and public relations. What are some red flags that you might see or that you might, so when you're looking, let's say you have a candidate that you're evaluating or you're looking at someone that claims to be an expert, so you search them online or anywhere, and what would you say are some red flags?
I think lack of depth would be a red flag. So if you can't discover more about this, this candidate, that's a challenge.
Okay.
And then, of course, like we mentioned earlier too, just unusual things that you find in some of the other platforms, can be a red flag. So it's a reason for you to make sure that those are cleaned up.
That's great.
I'll jump in on this, and I'm going to circle back just because I did want to add something. So for the clinical research, one of the things, research is huge in any career field. I think in the military, we don't do enough time for research because everything's to me, that being in the military and public relations, there's a lot of crisis communication. So we don't take the time to really focus on the research, and research is important for everything, to include your online brand and branding. So I would leverage your clinical research tools and show how data can be used in whatever you want to go into. So if you know how to get data, that's one of the things that I would leverage as a strength, and just knowing what your strengths are. And then as for the nonprofit or volunteering, listen, this goes back to the online brand. I'm an executive member on a board. I had no idea how much work a nonprofit board is. And so if you're looking, don't just volunteer, see if you can go out to be a board member, because that's going to take it to another level. But again, it goes back to your brand, right? So, my podcast is about empowering women and owning stories. I joined the local YWCA, which is, we help empower women, we help eliminate racism, and we help provide shelter for women that need it, that need a helping hand. So although my volunteer all leads back into that online brand, right? So if I'm about empowering women, then the volunteering that I do, the extracurriculars that I do, all go right back into that online brand that I have established. And as far as red flags, I'm a big action versus talk. There's a lot of people out there that will put talk that will talk a lot, that will jump on bandwagons. It's what are your actual actions to support what you're saying. So if I'm over here saying I'm empowering women, but I'm not doing anything at all to help the women in my community, I'm not a part of any organizations that help build women, then maybe I'm all talk. And I feel like Brandon hit the nail on the head, authenticity. I mean, really a red flag is, are you just talk? Or are you just doing what everybody else is doing versus what are you actually doing? And that's all I wanted to say on those topics.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And so as we get to the end here, and I want to leave some time at the end for Mary to kind of close things up, we do ask one fun question of all of our alumni to make sure that we, again, start that connection. So for fun, what is your favorite part of being ECU alumnus?
Well, I guess I'll start. Everybody loves a pirate. It's just, it's one of the consistent things about being about the pirates. So everybody loves a pirate.
That's right.
Natasha, you want to?
I think,
Natasha, go ahead.
yeah, I think for me, I travel a lot all over the world, and I normally have I have my ECU magnet. I let people know I'm a pirate. But the best example I have is I was scared to death to come to North Dakota because I was like, there's no trees. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I've never been anywhere that's really, really cold. And I was scared to death. And as soon as we got into North Dakota, I was at a gas station and I saw, an ECU magnet on a vehicle, and I threw up the hook as they were leaving, and they gave me the hook back. And I think that's what I enjoy about being a pirate, is that I can find one anywhere. We're everywhere. And it was the little things that reminded me of home, and that I was connected. So it's that connection.
Yeah, you really can find pirates anywhere. But I live in Raleigh, so I think one of the benefits here is that I get to see a lot of pirates, both people that I went to school with and new people that I meet all the time. We just have a really strong alumni base here in Raleigh, and that's one of the best things for me personally. I think if I lived in somewhere like North Dakota, I think I would get really excited when I saw someone that was donning the purple and gold or whatever, but that would be fun. Obviously football, I'm excited about the change that's happening with the football program, and I'm looking forward to hopefully getting back down there this fall. So.
We're all hoping. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So again, thank you guys. Let's all join thanking the alumni that have joined us on the panel to share their expertise today. Great job. And now I'm going to turn things over to Mary to kind of close things up.
Yes, thank you all for joining us for this session today. And thank you to Natasha, Brandon, and Carl for your time and for sharing your advice with us. Today's panelists can be found again on our networking platform, ECU Connect. ECU Connect is the pirate network to use to locate fellow pirate alumni, faculty, staff, find any job or career advice, learn about pirate events near you, keep updated on everything ECU, and much, much more. So you can activate your profile at ecuconnect.com. Additionally, as was mentioned, we do have 2 more installments coming up of our career expert panels, including leveraging an advanced degree on June 23rd and how to navigate a career change on July 7th. So further details are available online at piratealumni.com/career panels. We also shared a few different other resources in the chat. As was mentioned, since our session today is being recorded, we will post this in the upcoming week so that you can always refer back to this as well. And thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Go Pirates!
Go Pirates.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Nation.